In this video, I take a DMAX away for 3 days and I'll tell you what I think. If you follow me on Instagram, you'd know that over the long weekend I had the opportunity to borrow a Dmax. It was a 2018 model with 7,500 kilometres on it, so as far as I'm concerned it was brand new. It was the LS spec, which is the second from the bottom. Like a lot of owners of older four-wheel drives, sometimes I think about moving into something newer. Then I think about common rail fuel pumps and DPFs, bent chassis, lack of off-road ability, the sheer cost of it all, and the fact that it's going to take me a huge amount of time and money to get it back to how I want it. Generally these thoughts go around and around my head for a little while, and then I think, bugger it, I'm just going to stick with what I've got. Now for those of you that already know me, I have a 2002 Isuzu DMAX Patrol ute. So that vehicle comes with actually nothing. There are no features. It has no cup holders, no seat adjustability, no carpet, no leather, no electric windows, no adjustable mirrors. Doesn't even have a fuel warning light if you're running out of fuel. Of course, you can't forget some of the great features that the GU Patrols did come with, and that's a factory pull to the left no matter what you do, the fact that the seat belts don't retract properly from the factory, and also the fact that the steering wheel is not actually in the centre of the driver's seat. And if you're lucky enough to own a ZD30 variant of a Patrol, there's a whole nother list of things that I could go into, which I'm not going to bother with right now. With all that said though, I do love the old ute, and with the STS Series 4 seats in it and a load on the tray, it's actually pretty comfy on long trips. But I still thought it would be an interesting experiment to take a dual cab away for 2 or 3 days and just see what it's like, see what all the fuss is about, see if I could be converted to buy something new. Now I live in the country, so this trip is actually taking a full drive to the city, which is probably the reverse to what you'd normally see in most reviews. But what I wanted to do was see what it would be like to live with this as a daily driver. We know that a dual cab ute is not an off-road maniac. They're all pretty much the same, they've all got the same sorts of capabilities. Some have LSD, some have lockers and some have open diffs, but all of those things can be changed with aftermarket accessories. For the most part, a Ranger, a Triton, a DMAX, even a VW Amarok are all going to do fairly similar things in off-road situations. So this is more about the day-to-day ownership of this vehicle. Is it something that I could live with? Is it something that's going to be able to do all of the things that I want it to be able to do? And are the compromises going to be too much in one way or the other compared to the old Nissan Ute? But don't worry, we will take it off-road as well, because it is a four-wheel drive after all. Now people on the internet love to hate the look of the DMAX and claim that it's a bit dated. I don't particularly agree with that. I think this particular DMAX with the AFN bar on the front, some side steps and a canopy actually looks pretty decent. The only thing I don't like about the AFN bar is that there's nowhere on it to hold your beer while you're working on it or leaning on it talking to your mates. And I know that sounds silly, but it has actually been a problem several times just over a few days. The other thing I don't like about the AFN bar is the fact that that centre bar across the front of the grille is actually just a little bit too low. And if you look at it from the wrong angles, it gets in the way of the Isuzu logo, and I wonder how effective it would be if you had a roo actually hit it and whether it would roll over the top of it and go onto the bonnet. Now on the inside of the DMAX, it's not going to win any awards for comfort, but it's not a horrible place to be, especially when you compare it to my old DX Patrol. I mean, it has all sorts of bells and whistles in it that makes the inner child in me gleam with joy, but at the end of the day, these are pretty standard fitment on a 2019 vehicle. Well, the LS model that we had the standard stuff, electric windows, power mirrors, a pretty decent sounding stereo, but no Apple CarPlay or anything flash like that. Had the cruise control that you would expect on the steering wheel, Bluetooth and volume controls on the steering wheel. Everything that you would expect in a modern day Corolla. The downside on the interior is the seats. They're not particularly comfortable. In fact, they reminded me a little bit of the MQ Triton that I drove a month or two before. Spent over 1,000 kilometres in the driver's seat of both of these, and for some reason they felt like I was bananaed in the seat. And I don't know if that's just because I'm 6'3" or whether shorter people have the same issue, but it felt like my shoulders were being pushed forward and I couldn't sort of relax in the seat. And that was probably exacerbated by the fact that it didn't have any lumbar control. In fact, it didn't really have any adjustments other than forward, backwards, and tilt. I'm assuming that the higher end models of the DMAX would have some more adjustability in the seat and maybe comfier seats all around. But that was actually something that really annoyed me. And if you were planning on buying a DMAX and planning on doing long runs in it, you'd really want to make sure you had an extended test drive to make sure that that was going to be okay for you. Because when I first got in it, I didn't really notice the problem with the seats. The MQ Triton I did. When I got in the MQ Triton, it was instant. I hated that seat straight away. When I got in the DMAX, it didn't seem too bad, but after sitting behind the wheel for a couple of hours, it did start to aggravate my back. We'll just put it this way. With both of those dual cab utes, when I got back into the 17-year-old Patrol, I was very happy to be back in the Patrol seats. Granted, I do have STS Series 4 seats in my old ute, but I reckon the old factory DX seat, which didn't have any adjustability either, would have given these two dual cabs a run for their money comfort-wise. Under the bonnet of this DMAX is the old Ford JJ1 engine that's been around since the noughties. It is the TC variant, so it's a lower compression motor, which I suppose means it can have more boost, and it does have a variable vane turbo, which I assume is probably more for emissions than it is for drivability. The other downside to this variant of the Ford JJ1 is the fact that it has a DPF on it, although reports say this one's not as bad as the Toyotas and the Rangers. So even with the lower compression and the new injection system and the variable vane turbo, there is a slight increase in torque over the original Ford JJ1s, but there's not really any increase in kilowatts. Although you do get the advantage of having a motor that's literally been proven over decades of reliable use, and it is an actual truck motor. It's used in the N series Isuzu trucks, the little small 4.5 ton jobbies. The other thing I like about the Ford JJ1 is it is a timing chain motor, and I'm a big fan of timing chain motors. I don't like timing belts with interference motors. It's just a time bomb waiting to go off as far as I'm concerned. Because this is a 2018 model, it had the new 6-speed Aisin automatic gearbox in it. This is supposedly a very good thing. But with a 6-speed gearbox and a little 4-banger diesel, you do pick up a little bit of an economy saving having that extra cog, but it does come with a downside. And that's the fact that the computer is constantly trying to get that thing into the highest gear possible, and it means anytime you want to put your foot on the accelerator, it has to kick back at least one and quite often two cogs, which can be a little bit annoying, especially around town. Once you get out on the highway, it drops right down into top gear, and it's actually not a bad ride. It's nice and quiet, and it lugs along quite happily. I didn't tow with it, so I don't know what it would be like towing, but I imagine it would be kicking back gears left, right and centre. But I did notice you are able to put it into manual mode with the cruise control on, which some vehicles don't allow you to do, and that is great for when you're towing. On the highway, it was getting around about 9 litres per 100 kilometres. So both around town and on the highway, the DMAX certainly did the job. If you were going to buy one of these as your wife's daily driver, and you wanted to use it on the weekend to go camping, you'd really have to make sure that she was happy with the sound that it makes. Now, I know I'm not one of these people who complains about noisy vehicles. I'm not the sort of person that says, oh, you shouldn't get mud tyres because they're noisy. I mean, I drive around in a TD42 with no mufflers, and it's almost like I need to wear aviation headsets to talk to the person next to me. But this Ford JJ1 sound is just not a nice sound. I mean, sure enough, when you're driving around town and you just got it idling and lumping around at low RPMs, it's kind of cute. It's a little bit like a white fluffy dog growling at you when you're playing with a toy. But once you get the revs up, it's just a horrible sound. It just sounds like things are going to come out of it. And it really just resonates throughout the whole cab. So that's something that you would probably get used to. But if your wife wants a more refined ride, then the DMAX is probably not the vehicle for you. I would probably go and look at one of the Triton variants, the MQ, or even the new model that's just come out. Now, the DMAX did have one thing that just absolutely drove me crazy, and it is actually very frustrating. The lag and the throttle response is just ridiculous. I mean, you can count to 3 slowly after you've stabbed that throttle all the way down, and it doesn't do anything. That's when you take off from a standing start or rolling along at, say, 70 k's an hour. It was so bad that it actually became a bit of a running joke on the weekend. You know, you'd be driving along, you'd stab the throttle so hard that everyone in the car could hear it, and then everyone would look at each other and wait and wait and wait, and then all of a sudden it'd kick back a couple of cogs and it would spring to life. Most infuriating. In fact, almost to the point where it's dangerous. If you're not used to it and you try and pull out into traffic with that car, you are going to get yourself into strife. And I actually will point out that I drive a 12-ton truck as well by Isuzu, and it's actually the same. So I don't know if this is just an Isuzu thing or what. It's not a turbo lag, or it doesn't feel like a turbo lag. It feels like an artificial lag from the ECU, and it is just god awful. But I guess that's something that you would get used to driving it around. You would just start to adjust, and after a while you probably wouldn't even notice it. But for me this weekend, it drove me absolutely nuts. I'm used to having a throttle cable off the back of my accelerator that goes to my fuel pump, and when I push it in, diesel goes into the engine, smoke comes out, noise happens, and we slowly creep away. But that's because it's a TD42. On the upside, the DMAX does get up and boogie once you've actually got past that initial lag, and it's a very torquey little motor. In fact, I feel like the gearbox is letting it rev too much. It's almost when it changes gear, the sound of the pain of the engine finally goes away, and the ute actually seems to pull harder than it was before. I think it would be good for Isuzu to consider making those gears change earlier. It's just seems like it's struggling when it revs that high. And interestingly enough, in the N-Series trucks, they have a lower rev limiter and a lower red line. So maybe there's something in that. But because it seems to have a reasonable amount of torque at sort of low revs, we're talking about sort of 17 to 1900 RPMs, you can feel it really start to pull. I think this ute would tow quite well. I didn't tow anything with this particular ute. It just feels like it's going to get the job done if you stick something heavy behind it. Now, even though I live quite near to Graham Cahill, I'm not him, and I actually used somebody's car that they paid actual money for. So I wasn't going to go out there and take this onto tracks and make it do things it was never designed to do, break it, roll it, all that sort of garbage. What I did with this particular car was do what most people would want to do with it day to day. But I still had to take it four-wheel driving because it wouldn't be a four-wheel drive review without it. So once we got back home from Perth, we took it out to our little four-wheel drive playground down the road and took it through a few obstacles that you would expect the average family person to take their dual cab ute on. Now remember, this dual cab ute has the tyres that were sold with it from brand new and a stock suspension. So this is pretty much straight out of the box. Other than the AFN bar, the canopy and the side steps, this is pretty much as stock as a rock. Now, the biggest issue with the DMAX off-road was, as you'd probably expect, it was just ground clearance. They're not particularly high off the ground from the factory, none of the dual cabs are. You'd notice in this footage here that every now and then you just lose a little bit of traction as it bottoms out. And you can see here it's mainly the diff and the transfer case that are actually bottoming out to the point where you left grooves in the mud in this little puddle here. But despite what this video looks like, some of these hills here are actually quite steep, and the approach and departure angles on this vehicle are actually pretty decent. I think the AFN bar helps with the approach angles, but we didn't bottom out the front or rear at all through any of these little runs, and that was actually something that I was expecting it to do, so we'll give it props for that. And of course, none of these obstacles here are overly challenging, and that's not the point of this exercise, but you can see that in a range of different scenarios, this thing actually goes okay off-road. And if you were to put a 2-inch lift and some bigger tyres on it, you'd actually be surprised where this thing will get you. But if you just want to tow a camper trailer or a caravan or pack the tent in the back and go camping with the kids, I don't see any problem at all with having a DMAX, or any of the dual cabs for that matter. So overall, I quite liked the DMAX. I mean, it's not quite as refined as the Triton, and it certainly feels a little bit more agricultural, but I think that's part of the appeal for the DMAX and why people want them. And the fit and finish is quite nice inside. It's better than the Colorado, even though they look very similar. But I did find the fact that they don't paint under the bonnet or behind the fuel cap in the colour of the car, it's still in the primer colour, is pretty average and a little bit disappointing. The Ford JJ1 engine does have a good reputation, and it's a reputation that's been earned over decades of use. And that's something that the Triton doesn't have. And that's not to say that the Triton has an issue with the 2.4 litre motor that's in them, but the Ford JJ1 is a proven engine, and the Triton's engine just isn't. I think if you're after something with longevity, the DMAX has got to be the one that you're going for. And despite what John Cadogan says about reliability not necessarily being related to longevity, and the fact that new car buyers wouldn't want longevity because they're going to probably change the car over anyway, I think that's the wrong way to think about it, because the reason that D-Maxes are so expensive to buy second-hand is because people buying them second-hand want them because of the longevity, because of the reputation. That's why Land Cruisers hold their value so much. So John, I think you're wrong there. I think new car buyers need to think about longevity, and they need to consider that. And I think that's why a lot of people are buying the D-Max. So what did I think over the weekend? Well, I averaged 9.2 litres per 100 kilometres on a range of country and highway roads and a lot of city driving, and I was really giving it a fair bit of punishment at times to get in and out of traffic. And I think that's actually quite respectable for a car that weighs as much as the D-Max and has a couple of aftermarket accessories. It was reasonably comfortable, there was plenty of room. In fact, the rear seats have quite a lot of leg room for a dual cab, and I'm assuming the Colorado would be the same, and that was a nice surprise. It wasn't horrible to drive, although it was a little bit hard to park at times, but all in all, you'd learn to live with those few shortcomings that it has if you bought one. So would I buy one? Well, I don't think I'd buy one. No, I don't think I'd buy any dual cab ute because it's not really fit for what I'm doing right now in my life. If there was the perfect dual cab out there, I would probably consider it, but let's face it, I'd be putting myself into $40,000-$50,000 worth of debt to have something that I still need to spend money on and modify to have it do what my car already does that I own outright. For those 3 to 4 litres per 100 kilometres that I'm going to save in fuel, it's going to take a heck of a long time to pay off $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 worth of debt. And I didn't find it really that much more comfortable than my car. I found both the Triton and D-Max a little bit quieter on the highway than my car, but not really any more comfortable. In fact, I'd almost lean the other way and say my old Patrol is more comfortable than these new dual cabs. I'm certainly not interested in buying into the Ford saga and having a stupidly expensive Ranger with DPF issues and no service from Ford, and I'm not interested in having that same Ford van engine in a Mazda. I certainly wouldn't be buying a VW, in fact you couldn't give me one. And as far as the Colorado goes, I think they're pretty much taking a leaf out of Ford's book as far as Holden service levels go, and the reliability of these 2.8 litre engines is also a little bit suspect. So it would have to be between the Triton and the D-Max, and to be honest I don't know which one I would buy if I was forced to buy a brand new dual cab or a second hand late model dual cab. I guess it would depend on the primary use. If it was my wife going to be driving it every day, I'd probably get the Triton because it's a little bit quieter and a little bit more refined. But if it was going to be my car, I'd probably get the D-Max. But at the end of the day, I guess it comes down to you, your needs, your wants, what you like, what you don't like. But all I can do is tell you what I think. And with that all done and said, that's enough from me. And if you liked this and found it interesting, please subscribe, and I'll see you in a later video.